Hello everyone, in this video I will read to you the Law of Money, Chapter 5, Receiving is also a skill. Why gratitude attracts and entitlement repels. The silent etiquette of accepting money in Vietnamese culture. There is a strange thing that I have noticed over the years watching people live, love, work, struggle, and pray for more money. Most people believe the hardest part is earning. Very few realize the hardest part is receiving. I learned this lesson long before I had words for it, long before I ever thought about wealth as a philosophy. I learned it quietly, the way Vietnamese children learn most important things, not from lectures, but from watching adults' hands, faces, and silences. The law of receiving money, what our ancestors could not hold. When I think about money now, I no longer think of it as something personal. I see it as something that had been traveling for a very long time, moving quietly from one generation to another, carrying not only value but memory. Long before I ever touched money with my own hands, my ancestors had already formed a relationship with it through survival, loss, restraint, and endurance. Their experiences shaped the way money entered our household, the way it was spoken of, and the way it was emotionally charged. I did not inherit their wealth, but I inherited their posture toward receiving, cautious, tense, alert, as if abundance were a visitor that could never be trusted to stay. In my family, money was rarely celebrated. It was managed, protected, hidden, and stretched, but seldom welcomed. The elders carry histories that make receiving dangerous. They had lived through times when having too much invited attention, envy, or harm, and when receiving aid came with strings that cost dignity. So they learned to survive by minimizing needs and lowering expectations. This wisdom kept them alive, and I honor it. But survival wisdom, when passed unchained into a new era, can quietly become a cage. Still, once a year, something older than fear resurfaces. During the new year, the ancestral memory soften. The rituals return us to a time when giving and receiving were sacred acts, not economic transactions. Elders prepare red envelopes carefully, sometimes counting and recounting the bills, not because of the amount, but because the act itself mattered. When those envelopes were placed into the hands of the children, it was not simply money being passed along, it was lineage acknowledging itself, blessing its continuation. The children bow, the elders smile, and for a brief moment the family remembered that flow, not hoarding, was what sustained life. As a child, I sensed this without understanding. I felt the weight of the moment more than the value of the money. The red envelope felt warm, alive, almost breathing. It was proof that despite hardship, despite fear, despite years of constriction, my ancestors still believed in giving forward. They might not have known how to receive abundance themselves, but they wanted the next generation to begin the year with open hands rather than clenched fists. Yet even in that ritual there was a quiet contradiction. Often after the greetings and the blessing, the money would be collected again for safekeeping. Sometimes it was truly safe, sometimes it was absorbed into household survival. The child learned an unspoken lesson. What is given can be taken back, and what you receive does not fully belong to you. This lesson sank deeper than words. It taught the nervous system that receiving is temporary, conditional, and slightly unsafe. That belief followed me into adulthood. I carry within me the echo of the ancestors who could not afford to relax. When money came, my body tightened before my mind could speak. I felt responsible for it immediately, as though I were holding something fragile that could shatter if mishandled. I did not know then that this was not my fear alone, it was the inherited vigilance of generations who learned that abundance was unpredictable and that loss could arrive without warning. My ancestors did not repel money because they were unworthy. They repelled it because receiving fully was never an option. They lived in times when holding too much invited danger and dependence invited humiliation. They learn to survive by staying small, by blending in, by never expecting generosity to last. That strategy protected them, but it also taught their descendants to flinch when life extended its hand too openly. Money, however, does not respond to linear loyalty. It responds to openness. It does not stay where it's fear or distrusted. When I began to notice how quickly money passed through my hands, I realized that I was reenacting an own ancestral script. I was honoring my ancestor by repeating their caution, but I was also repeating their limitation. What once ensured survival was now quietly blocking flow. In Eastern philosophy, there is an understanding that each generation is not meant to carry the same burdens as the previous one. We inherit wisdom, not wounds. To continue repeating ancestral fear is not respect, it is stagnation. True honoring means taking what preserves life and releasing what no longer serves it. Receiving then becomes an act of healing, not only for oneself, but for entire lineage. When I began to sit with this understanding, my relationship with money shifted. I stopped asking why money came and left so quickly, and instead asked what memory was activated when it arrived. I notice how receiving make me feel exposed, how ease trigger guilt, and how abundance stir a strange sadness, as though I were betraying those who live with less. This sadness was not mine alone. It belonged to the family field. It was grief what my ancestors endured and for what they never allowed themselves to have. To receive fully, I have to grieve first. I have to acknowledge that those before me live with constant vigilance, that they give more than they receive, and that they rarely felt supported by life. Only then I could separate gratitude from guilt. I could thank my ancestors for their endurance without continuing their fear. I could receive not in defiance of them, but in completion of what they began. Receiving gracefully, I learn, is not indulgence, it is repair. When money stays, when it circulates calmly, when it's neither hoarded or rejected, it signals to the ancestral line that survival mode is no longer the only option. Giving generously from that place does not weaken the family, it strengthens it. It tells the lineage that flow has been restored, that life is no longer something to praise against, but something to participate in. The law of receiving money is therefore an ancestral law. It asks each generation a quiet question: will you continue to live as though loss is inevitable, or will you allow life to meet you without armor? Money follows the answer, not the intention. It settles where it is allowed to rest, and it moves on where it is treated as a threat. When I imagine my ancestor now, I no longer see them counting anxiously or hiding what little they had. I see them standing behind me, watching carefully as I learn to hold without fear. I imagine them curious, perhaps uncertain, but relieved that someone in the line has learned to exhale. In receiving calmly, I do not erase their struggle, I transform it. I turn endurance into ease, vigilance into trust, and survival into continuity. The child who once held a red envelope still lives within me, but now she is no longer asked to give it back. She is allowed to keep it, to use it wisely, to let it circulate. Through her hands, money moves differently. It no longer carries the weight of unspoken fear. It carries intention, stability, and care forward. This is the deepest law of receiving. When one generation learns to receive without fear, the river begins to flow again for all who come after. Thank you so much for listening, and please click subscribe to tune in for the next chapter 6.